let's get started. I want to be respectful of Sam's time here. It's about 7 minutes past the hour. So welcome everybody to our new um, Autism Stories series. We're probably going to be running this for a little while, probably through the summer because we're just getting folks kind of trickling in who are willing to share. And Sam is no stranger to this group. It's impressed. I think Sam is probably our most popular speaker. So I'm so glad that he's back, and I'm
Thanks,
so
Rob.
glad he's willing to share his story. And we've heard so much about Sam, but I don't think we ever heard so much about the way beginnings. So he's going to share with us today. And guys, if I can just have you all mute your mics. Yeah, because what we're going to do is we're going to have Sam sort of tell a story the way he wants to tell it, no interruptions. And towards the end, we'll have some time for questions. Excuse me. All right, Sam, take it away. Thanks.
All right. So as most, if not all of you know, I'm Sam Farmer. Openly and proudly autistic, counterintuitive though that may seem. Author, information technology consultant, neurodiversity community self-advocate, public speaker, musician, husband, father, brother, etc. All those things rolled into one. And really, my story starts back when I was a little shy of 3 years old. My story, that is, as told through my uniquely autistic lens. That just shy of 3, I was diagnosed with a learning disability. In my case, in auditory processing. And I write in my book, A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, better one than none, in the sense that even though I wouldn't learn about my autism identity until around age 40, I at least had one diagnosis that came nice and early, in the sense that the early diagnosis of that qualified me for special education classes and other accommodations, which in retrospect really came in handy in terms of how my life would unfurl from that point on. At the time, it was really, really hard, because when you find this out about yourself when you're not even 3 years old, that's a very vulnerable young age, to say the least. And there was fallout from that. Fallout in terms of me from a very, very young age knowing I was different when I didn't want to be different from most of my peers, having challenges around how I perceived other people in the world around me. So awareness of others as well as self-awareness. There were self-care challenges. There were challenges around socialization and making friends. And academic challenges, which thankfully I got really good help with, to where throughout grade school, I worked hard enough that I was able to still make good grades, but I had to work unbelievably hard and for good lengths of time in order to make the grade. But in retrospect, I feel that was a plus, because that sort of approach built into me a very strong work ethic, which throughout my life of almost 55 years come June has served me quite well. Many people in my boat, and that is adults who were identified as autistic late in life, we kind of view ourselves as being part of a, quote, lost generation. Not to be confused with the lost generation that F. Scott Fitzgerald and his contemporaries wrote about, but a unique kind of lost generation in the sense that a big part of who we are, of our identity, was unknown to us until later in life. I wouldn't find out until 40 years old. Although in my case, in retrospect, I feel as though I was very fortunate, really, in many respects, to where I would say I was maybe only partially lost. My life, I think, is a good study in this notion that the people with whom we associate will either make us or break us. In my case, I had all the right people in my life in terms of family, friends, teachers, colleagues, who made me who I am. Granted, there were a few people who tried to break me, who bullied me, who did not accept me for who I am. We all deal with those kinds of people. I learned somehow, if not miraculously, of the importance of focusing most of your time and energy on kind, good-hearted, smart, compassionate people, and to work to rise above what the undesirable people in my life would dish out. This notion of rising above. Bullying is inevitable. Undesirable people are just an inevitable fact of life. They're out there. The key is to fight back emotionally and psychologically, to not let what they dish out get under your skin. Now, early on in my life, when I didn't even have the wherewithal to do otherwise, I unfortunately, to an extent, allowed what I would call the ableism going on around me and in society at large to get under my skin. And that's a notion that the advocate community refers to as internalized ableism. The fact that discrimination against those of us who are disabled, whether we have a developmental or intellectual or invisible or physical or visible disability, whatever kind of disability, we face discrimination inevitably on many fronts. And I allowed all that to get under my skin to compromise, though thankfully not irreparably, but nonetheless to an extent to compromise my self-esteem, my sense of self. Thankfully, I had parents who made a lot of good decisions for me, who helped me in many respects to position me to be able to eventually build strong self-esteem, that eventually I could feel comfortable in my own skin. My mother always reminded me of all the things that I would do well, of all the things about me about which I should be proud. My father was particularly effective at steering me towards pursuits that he knew I wouldn't just really enjoy, but at which I would also become proficient. Among them, music, which runs deep in my family history on his side of the family, as well as athletic pursuits like cross country, where I have the build of a distance runner and ended up being a pretty good cross country runner, tennis, that where my father was a squash player, he saw in me talent, in my case, with a tennis racket. And so he encouraged me to play tennis. And with cross country and tennis in middle school and in high school, I did those things well enough to be able to make the traveling team at my school. With tennis, both junior varsity and varsity tennis, and with cross country, varsity from the start, that I credit largely not just my own efforts at those games, but also my father for steering me towards those pursuits in the first place. And then chief among them, music. For 6 years in college and postgraduate work, my focus was primarily on music, music history and theory, as well as music education. Even though I ended up becoming an information technology consultant after college, I have still been able to make a pretty decent income doing music in addition to my primary source of income, teaching piano lessons, playing piano and keyboards in various settings, singing, writing songs, supplemental income from those pursuits, but nowhere near to the extent that I benefited self-esteem wise from being really good and in finding success and opportunities as a musician, where I sing, I write songs. My primary instrument is piano. And so I was fortunate to have parents who would do all the right things to position me for future happiness and success in life. Not only that, they were well aware of my sensitivities and vulnerabilities and disciplined me and parented me accordingly. My mother would coach my brothers and my father as to do's and don'ts with me when we were growing up, so that my self-esteem could, to some extent, be preserved. And they always met me where I was at. And by that, I mean, they would treat me and act towards me based on, at the time, who I was, as opposed to who they felt I should be, based on who or based on how they thought I should behave or communicate or socialize, how I should think, how I should learn. Those kinds of expectations can really be destructive, depending upon the degree to which they're imposed on unidentified autistic individuals, neurodivergent individuals, disabled individuals. They always met me where I was at, based on who I was at the time, what I could and could not do. That was huge. And these were all things that would eventually enable me. It would take a while. That would enable me to get past my internalized ableism, what I was describing earlier. For example, with the internalized ableism, it was either my junior or senior year of college, and my mother delivered what she thought was really great news. She said to me, Sam, by virtue of your learning disability, I was able to make arrangements for you to get a very valuable accommodation in school, whereby you've been granted permission to take the SATs untimed. And upon hearing that, you would think I would jump for joy at that kind of news. But in reality, I very abruptly and very firmly rejected the whole concept of it, wanting and insisting to be treated and evaluated on the same terms as my peers. I just wanted to be evaluated the way most everybody else I went to school with would be evaluated with respect to the SATs. How is that an example of internalized ableism? Well, it indicates that my self-esteem at the time had been eroded enough to the extent where I felt as though I couldn't be who I was. I could not accept my learning disability. I couldn't accept the ways in which I knew I was different. I just wanted to be like everybody else. I greatly regret that. But in a way, it was inevitable because at that age, I can certainly understand why I felt that way, though in retrospect, I regret that I felt that way. That self-acceptance is a very important thing, without which self-esteem to some extent is inevitably going to be compromised. It's going to be half-baked when you're not able to accept who you are, to accept a learning disability, as hard as that can be, to accept a disability as being part of who you are. And so I was unable to do that at the time, but in recent years would eventually figure out how to. But look how long it took. This example of the SATs happened when I was a teenager. I'm almost 55 years old. Only very recently did I really figure out how to embrace actually the disability label. Not just accept it, but embrace it. Where I write in my book, A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, I write about the 3 Ds: disability, diagnosis, disorder. And I deeply criticize those 3 terms as being terms that can potentially do damage to sense of self if you let them. I was at the point while writing my book where I could freely write about the word disability while not letting it bother me. But I still condemned the word. I still condemned the label, even though I was able to write about it without it creating undue emotional unease. Only very recently did I learn how to actually embrace the label and say, yes, I'm disabled, and that's okay, because my disability, but not only that, my strengths, my talents, my unique attributes are all part of who I am. Now, as a neurodiversity community self-advocate and a believer in the neurodiversity paradigm, I am of the belief that unlike what the DSM-5 diagnostic manual suggests, and unlike what the prevailing narrative around autism and disability would suggest, that I am not disordered. I reject the notion that I have a disorder. Rather, I look at autism and learning disability and other diagnoses that fall under the neurodiversity umbrella. I don't view them as disorders. I view them instead as neurotypes. What is a neurotype? It's the way our brains are wired and the way our nervous systems function, which inevitably shape how we interact with the world around us. It's not a disorder, it's a way of being. It's a way of being. Where, in my view, the disorder label comes in is that based on my neurotype and that of others on the autism spectrum, is that our neurotype carries with it ways of socializing, communicating, behaving, learning, and thinking that are at odds with societal expectations around those. The greater society carries with it expectations around communication, socialization, behavior, etc., that were formulated without us in mind. And it's those external factors, those societal influences that me and others in the advocate community can find very, very disabling, and from which I believe the disorder label stems. When you're autistic, that neurotype is in the minority, and we refer to that as neurodivergence or neurominority, where most people are non-autistic and are what we would refer to perhaps as neurotypical, or those in the neuromajority. And it's those external influences from the greater society shaped by the neuromajority that we find very disabling. But when we are accommodated in ways that level the playing field for us, that allow us to be at our best, we move in a way from feeling disabled to feeling empowered, if not valued or accepted. And ultimately, the end goal of the advocacy community is to ultimately feel a sense of belonging. We've come a long way in that regard, but admittedly, we have a long way to go. A long way to go. Autism acceptance, much less sense of belonging, has a long way to go. In large part because the prevailing narrative around disability and around autism focuses disproportionately on pathology, on deficit, on hardship, and not enough on our unique attributes, our unique talents and abilities. In my view, it fails to embrace the big picture. It puts the responsibility for our disabilities entirely on us, rather than acknowledging these external societal influences that I have referred to here and that many of my fellow neurodiversity advocates also believe in. So I am a believer in neurodiversity. It's a worldwide movement, arguably a social justice movement, and a paradigm that offers an alternative way to view autism and disability, in a way that tries to destigmatize autism and disability, in the sense that humanity encompasses a multitude of neurotypes, much the way that biodiversity refers to the vast variety of life forms on Earth. Neurodiversity is with respect to the diversity inherent in the human population. Naturally occurring neurotypes, not disorders, not medical conditions, not something that you can get because you took the wrong vaccine or because your mother took Tylenol when she was pregnant, or whatever else, all the hurtful, patently false stereotypes that we're up against that contribute to the stigma. That all plays into what neurodiversity is all about. And that's what I believe in. I'm a believer in neurodiversity. Now, those who believe in what is referred to as the medical model of autism, I disagree with that model, but at the same time, I acknowledge that there are reasons why there are people who believe in the medical model. I don't dismiss the medical model. I disagree with it, but I won't dismiss it because I've met people who have reasons that I can understand for believing in that outlook on autism. That really, in my view, it depends on who you are and your lived experiences. That determines how you're going to view your autism or your disability. Oftentimes in life, there is more than one way to look at something. And that's something that I respect. So even though I disagree with the medical model, I refrain from delegitimizing it, because I know that particularly those who face particularly daunting challenges may very well believe that what they're dealing with is something that they would want to fix or for which they'd want to see a cure. Whereas for me, just based on who I am and my lived experiences, I write in my book, if I were to be cured of autism, I would become unrecognizable to myself. Because for me, but just for me, and there are others who are like-minded whom I've met, autism is core to who we are. So in 2016, my mother passed away. And of all places for me to publicly come out as autistic, it was at her funeral while eulogizing her. I did that because I wanted to give context to all that she had done for me while I was growing up. And thankfully, the family and friends and others who were there were very moved by that eulogy, that they asked me to try to write it out as best I could from memory. And I actually decided to listen to them. And I wrote down the eulogy as best I could. And that would form the basis for what would be my very first blog, published by the then Asperger Autism Network, AANE.org, who published my tribute to my mother and the eulogy I had given on their blog site. And from there, I would continue to write other blogs that I thought would be helpful and relevant to the autism community. And eventually all those blogs led to the idea for my book, which is called A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, subtitled Small Steps, Challenges, and Triumphs Through an Autistic Lens. That book was published in 2019. Already that'll be 5 years come late October of this year. And from that book, any number of doors have been open to me, just in terms of meeting the CASY community, other communities, my involvement and presenting in conferences for the Asperger Autism Network, recently rebranded the Association for Autism and Neurodiversity, still AANE.org, the Northeast Stark, various corporations, all kinds of public libraries, and other organizations where I have done author talks, public speaking engagements of various types. And so through my writing, which I continue to do, and through my public speaking, this is how I advocate for my community to try to bring about greater understanding of autism, of neurodiversity, with the hope that that would ultimately lead to greater acceptance of autism, and ideally, again, that end goal of a greater sense of belonging for us in society. One of my big pet issues that I have also decided to get involved in, and which is directly connected to my belief that society still has a very long way to go with respect to autism acceptance, is the reality of a school that is located only 2 towns over from where I live in Massachusetts, a school called the 𝙍𝙤𝙬𝙙 Educational Center. The publicist for the authors of a book called Pain and Shock in America found out about me either through social media or on the internet through my writings, that he reached out to me and said, would you read this book and would you consider writing about it and speaking on it afterwards? And I said, sure. And after only reading page 1 of this book, it changed my outlook really forever, in the sense that this is a school that uses electric shock and other aversive behavioral interventions for behavior modification purposes to try to stamp out or suppress behaviors that the school decided a long time ago were undesirable. And I could not believe what I was reading. It's remarkable what can go on in your own backyard without you even knowing it until you read about it. And so I said to myself, there's no way justifiably, there's no way that I can't write about this or speak about it if I really call myself a neurodiversity community advocate. Now that I know about this, this is something I need to address through my writing and through my speaking, if anything, to raise greater awareness and to try to move hearts and minds in the direction that one day, hopefully, these aversive practices at this school can come to an end. And so I'm a proud member of the Stop the Shock Coalition. I've given a couple of author talks to the Cassie Sparks community on this topic. I bring it up at pretty much every author talk. And the bottom line really is that torture, which the United Nations actually got involved with the goings-on in this school, and in their own words, appropriately called it torture, is no way to try to teach somebody or to help them grow. Torture is not a legitimate means for that. The JRC and I agree on one thing. We agree that behaviors that are injurious to others or that are self-injurious need to be addressed, but the ends cannot always justify the means to that end, particularly when the means involves torture. Unless you think that PTSD, burn marks, tissue damage are helpful outcomes. They're not. And so this is a pet issue of mine, one that I've publicly testified on in terms of bills introduced at the state level that would seek to outlaw these practices, commenting on the US Food and Drug Administration's proposed rule to prohibit the use of electric shock devices, my writing and my public speaking on the subject. This is a pet issue of mine that I care about very deeply. That really has become a core part of my advocacy efforts. So between that and my information technology consulting work, being a husband and a father to my son who's also autistic, my musical pursuits, I keep very, very busy. And it often gets quite exhausting with all the podcasts and writing and public speaking that I do, on top of everything else. And as I get older, I find that my energy level is not the same as it was. Admittedly, I typically rely on afternoon naps in order to get through the day, unless I really load up on my vitamin B12 supplements, which can give me a good energy boost, but only to an extent. That life can get exhausting, but I'm very fortunate, again, in the sense that I am autistic, and yet I'm able to say that I'm happy, that I'm successful in life. My wife and I will have been married for some 24 years. Actually, it'll be exactly 24 years come November. I've been a father for 16 plus years. My place of employment, come June, it'll be 28 years that I've been with my company. Loyalty is one of those traits that is relatively common in the autism community, in that once we know we're in the right environment with the right people, again, going back to this point about how the people with whom we associate will either make us or break us. If we find ourselves in a good situation, we will often remain loyal, very loyal. And so 28 years at my company speaks to that. Many of us in the autism community are very detail-oriented. As an information technology consultant, that ability of mine to be very meticulous with details has served me well. We tend to be good outside the box thinkers. We tend to be creative. hence my music activities, my songwriting. And we tend to be social justice warriors of sorts. Hence my involvement in the neurodiversity movement to try to destigmatize and to help the community of which I am proudly a part. And so that pretty much covers it. Not all, but much of what I have spoken of today can be read about in greater depth in my book, A Long Walk Down a Winding Road. Information about the book, links to all kinds of articles and podcasts and author talk videos, including those done for the CASY Sparks community, can be found at my website, shown here, samfarmerauthor.com. The book is kind of like a hybrid memoir / self-help book. Memoir in the sense that I look back on my past and tell stories from my past that I feel are relevant to kind of illustrate how I arrived at my self-help ideas and insights, to give those ideas and insights context. And the self-help areas that I write about in the book include things like social skills building, rising above bullying, self-esteem building, workplace success, being a good parent, both from the perspective of me as a son to my parents, as well as me as a father to my son, as well as doing my best to be a good spouse. But even if those self-help areas aren't directly relevant to what the reader would want to work on, it's a helpful book in the sense that it exposes what it can be like to be autistic from the perspective of somebody who actually walks in those shoes, as opposed to learning about autism secondhand from somebody who is non-autistic. Granted, parents, siblings, teachers, clinicians, others who work with, care for, and support autistic individuals, certainly what they have to say is valuable, and certainly they have been and should continue to have a seat at the table, but so do we. Autistic individuals ourselves, in the sense that we have those lived experiences that carry great value in this conversation about really what autism and neurodivergence really is all about. Nothing about us without us, many of us say. And so as I move forward and as the advocacy community moves forward in our efforts, we would insist really on having a seat at the table, because decisions really shouldn't be made, in our view, without our input, without our lived experiences being listened to and taken to heart. And so I will leave it at that. Any questions, folks? Comments? Any thoughts?
Thank you so much, Sam. I always really appreciate when you give talks, because I find everything you say so clear and makes a lot of sense, you know. So
Thanks, Roger.
invaluable insight. Um, you did mention one thing that jumps out when you're speaking is this internalized ableism. Um, and I guess how does one get over that? I mean, the way that I think about that is, I mean, it's probably just one way to think about it, but it's almost like uh, when we're young, we're sort of imprinted on this is how things this is the way human beings ought to behave. Uh, so you get this narrative in your head saying, okay, well, this is what's being told and modeled. How do I know that if I go against this, that I'm not being sort of labeled as like disobedient or a bad person, versus no, this is against who I am as a person.
Well, um, as we get older, we live and we learn. And thankfully, I've always known of the wisdom of listening to other people, of surrounding myself with good, intelligent, smart people, and not just surrounding myself with those types of folks, but also taking to heart what they have to say. And what I've learned from my fellow advocates, from fellow adult autistics, much of which I've learned since writing my book, is that disability is nothing to be ashamed of. Disability is worth embracing because it's a core part of who you are. And if you're not able to accept that aspect of yourself, then arguably your self-esteem and your efforts at overcoming the internalized ableism are going to be compromised. And so really it's been through learning from other people, learning about certain realities in society in terms of just the nature of humanity, that as human beings, we naturally judge other people, we naturally make comparisons. There are people in society who are in positions of greater power, and those of us in society who don't have that kind of power. And so there's a power dynamic that goes on in any scenario that involves discrimination. And if you're aware of that reality, you can use your knowledge of that reality to try to rise above the discrimination and say to yourself, look, ableism and discrimination are facts of life. Am I going to let it compromise my sense of self? Or am I going to not let it compromise my sense of self and rise above it? And that's an easy decision to make. And once you make that decision, I somehow was able to do the hard work of getting over that internalized ableism using the knowledge that I had learned from other people and learned from my own lived experiences. Because knowledge is power in terms of the power dynamic that's involved in societal ableism and discrimination. Having that knowledge empowers you to rise above the stigma and the discrimination so that it doesn't continue to compromise sense of self. So it's easier said than done, but that transformation can happen and did happen with me. But it took a very, very, very long time, as I said. Uh, that would be the best way, I think, Roger, that I can respond to that.
It kind of reminds me of this, I think it's an Ethiopian saying, fish discover water last. You know,
Interesting.
so when you're in the middle of it your whole life, you know, you don't really realize you're in the middle of it. You know, it until you have some perspective, some outside perspective. You know, like you might also compare it to, like, you know, people used to think the world was flat. Um, and then when you can sort of see a picture of the Earth from the outside, it's pretty clear it's not flat. Um, but I guess what you're saying here is it's hard. You can't rely on those. It's not. You can't always rely on people around you to have that perspective. You know, because if your perspective is a minority perspective, you know, and it's always at odds with those around you, then you may easily think, well, there's something wrong with me, and I need to adapt to sort of the status quo. Um, but then, and I think maybe part of it is, well, I think the beauty of this online stuff, you know, that I guess we're all doing now is that you can listen to all these other perspectives, you know, equally, you know, they're valid and make a lot of sense. You know, so now you're able to, I guess, step outside of that um, uh, the body of water you've been immersed in your entire life and kind of see, you know, how there's other ways of looking at things. Um, but I guess you wouldn't know that. Uh, and it's probably why it takes so long, right? Because we don't really know that in the beginning. You know, it's sort of
Yeah,
along the way.
that's true. That's true. There's only so much that you have in that brain of yours when you're younger that overcoming earlier challenges can take a while. And thanks to social media and thanks to my interactions with various individuals of all kinds of walks of life, I was able to learn what I needed to learn in order to get to where I am.
Yeah. I'm just reading a comment here. It says, uh, it's thanking that you addressed that question. Person grew up in a damaging family structure, uh, and they feel that their uh, thought cannot be, I guess, repaired because sort of the ableist programming. Uh,
Yeah, like I said, what I was able to pull off, it's much easier said than done.
mm-hmm.
And like I said, it's the people we're surrounded with who are either going to make us or break us, that it's regrettable
Mm-hmm.
that others. Um, I wish everybody could be as fortunate as I have been.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured the least I could do was write a book with not all but many of the ideas that I brought up here that anybody can read to get ideas that they can hopefully use to carve out better lives for themselves.
Guess the key is to gain more data. It's almost like you have to overwrite some of the data that has been downloaded into your brain, you know, for
But
most of
it's
your
got
life.
to be the right data. It
Right.
can't just be any data. It's got to be the right data in order to get to where you want to be.
That is true. That's
Um,
true. And knowing what the right data is and what's sort of dangerous data or misinformation, as we're so used to that term these days. Great. Does anyone else have any questions or anything they want to bring up?
Well, when I read his book, I could compare it to a lot of the stuff with dyslexia and stuff, and my kinesthetic, overpowering brain, and I have to sleep and take nuts. So I am awake all night. So I do art and stuff through the night, and then I sleep, like maybe go to bed at 8:30 a.m. and sleep till 2, and then get up. So I'm on an opposite. Like I decided to do that because during the day the kids are gone to school, all the kids. So I sleep. When they come home, I have 2 fans going to block sound. Because if I didn't have these fans on, I could hear down the road here on Washington Avenue. I could hear the train go by. I can hear planes. I can hear folks in the hall getting off the elevator. I can hear all the kids going up and down the hall. The same as if I go in the hall and stand by the elevator. I can hear people on the bottom floor. I can hear people on the top. I'm not even in the elevator. I can know which elevator's coming up and down and waiting. And then by the time I get on the elevator, I hear sound waves all over. I hear everybody on the first all the way going down and up. So I have to inhere block where I cannot sleep. I would be awake 24 hours a day, every day. So finally I got, like, once that lady talked the other week and I showed you my art, that was when I said, okay, we're gonna keep these on. Because there was I didn't even know there was an officer in the hall, there was a party down the hall. I heard nothing. These fans are good blockers. So I know now I'm getting good sleep. But everything Sam said in his book, I completed that book, completed reading that book earlier yesterday. Finally got through it. And I said, oh, very good. I can compare it to a lot of things, Oh, that's very good. Yeah, I got it. I'm
Thank
okay.
you.
But I had
Thank you for reading it.
yeah, but what I had to do for me to keep me safe from folks who don't understand me, I mean, even church folks, everybody started throwing knives and stuff. Like you're pretending and you're sick and this, that. I was really sick and very ill the whole 2023. Literally, that the healthcare people came, I had the physical therapists, those just trying to help me relearn how to do it. They gave me such a high dose of 𝙒𝙤𝙬𝙦 to the top dose. I seen a neurologist and he was talking to my friend, I thought was from church, and she's asking, is she doing and twisting her mouth? No, he said that she's not. Is she making her own hand tremble? No, that's a brain thing, and that's from the medicine. The medicine was giving me Parkinsonian symptoms, not that I have Parkinson's, but because it was the highest dose, and I'm allergic to all that medicine in that same family. So once he established that, he had me do some walking, and I left her after she dropped me off. I sat here and I said, you know what, God, I'm okay. I totally get this. That if you're given the top medicine dose, it can power out your brain. You're like slobbering and looking like crazy. And then when since it's all out of me now, I can think, clear minded. I can read, like, I've read like 30 books in 3 months, and I can remember everything without writing notes. I marked in all my books from beginning to end and all the way back to the dictionary and booking. So now I can remember stuff and no problem. Because I usually could read 5 or 6 books at a time and tell you everything I've been reading in each of those books. I'm back to that. So my photographic memory is back online, the pictures, because I can remember everything from childhood all the way through. I talked to my mom, I said I can remember everything. I can remember when I was in the hospital. I can remember which hospital. I can remember everything. But the blessing is, after reading that, I said, I'm okay, because he's okay. And so I started blocking everybody that was throwing knives at me and didn't believe me and calling me retardedly, the R word. And I said, let me block all these. I said, Father, I'm going to pray first, and I'm going to start blocking people. So I did. I blocked everybody, except for like 6 people, like my children, my mom, my aunts, and then a few, like one favorite friend and a couple friends in the building. So totally, I got like 5 friends, plus you guys there at CASY. So my therapist was here yesterday, and I called new directives. Well, there's nobody in this area who can treat my autism or give me a new testing. So there's nobody. She tried to find me one. I can't. So I have to switch medical and everything to find a person that deals with autistic adults at 64, like me. So far, there isn't any. So I'm glad I have you guys, because I'm okay and content. I'm fine. But I'm back to normal. So anyways, while you were talking, I drew this.
Oh, very nice.
And because like I felt so relaxed. I just said, let me just keep going. And so this is my own rendition. And yeah, I'm not done with her face, but yeah.
That's very nice.
Yeah. So I can draw as I listen and relax. And then since I already read your book, I knew everything in the book. So I was like, just listen and enjoy and keep drawing. So thank you. It's an excellent book. I would recommend it to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Helpful and eye-opening. But thank you, and I'll let somebody else speak. Thanks, Dr. Joe, and thanks, Dr. Sam Farmer.
Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts, questions, comments? I think we're good, Roger. It's a little after 2 o'clock anyway.
Very good. You know, all this, I came across this quote on the back of my planner. You know, usually they're not that helpful, but this one kind of fits the conversation here. It says, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Ralph
I
Waldo
would agree
Emerson.
with that. Absolutely, without question. Be who you are.
That's right. That's right.
Be who you are.
And all you can be. So again, thank you so much, Sam. And you know, we were going to have as usual, we'll have this thing recorded and up online. And you know, any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Sam. And I think Sam has his website under his picture here.
It's right next to my name there, samfarmerauthor.com. Can leave a message for me there.
Great. And thank you everyone for coming, and we will see you next time.